Yeah, this will be just Amanda, to be honest, sorry. So I really enjoyed that. I thought it was just fantastic kind of analytical quality. I wondered, although this might be specifically given like the kind of Foucauldian genealogical biopower kind of take at the end, this might be like an impossible request. But I was wondering if you could potentially offer some kind of tentative normative answers as to how we, or like, maybe not me, but policymakers who are situated within these kinds of language and meaning structures, how they can deal with the kind of slipperiness and open-endedness of language when they're kind of making policies.
I think you've got a big problem because, yeah, as you say, on the one hand, since 2000, when they kind of arguably started securitizing AIDS, you've just got this explosion in AIDS funding, just around the world, particularly with, I mean, the US PEPFAR scheme is like the biggest HIV/AIDS kind of money vehicle that's just like ever been seen. And you could argue that's kind of partly like the Millennium Development Goals as well. But you do have a problem where on the one hand, yeah, like this is pretty much probably going to be the best way that we can get the money needed to solve the problem. But I think it's more that you can, like, ironically, that it's not as binary as I sort of made it sound in the presentation. Like, you don't have to just say, like, either this is a security issue or it's a humanitarian issue, but rather you can adopt a sort of more nuanced approach. And quite a lot of the more recent stuff being written about that kind of field has suggested that actually what might be a sensible thing is to say that whilst this is a security issue, like note issue, not threat, it's also like a humanitarian issue, it's also a development issue, it's also all of these other problems that it inarguably is. And to in that way try and like break down this very sort of arbitrary like label that we just sort of tag on crises. So you've got like a weighing up of risks there. Because you can imagine, like, if you were the person like Richard Holbrooke, who was the US Special Representative or Permanent Representative, I can't remember, to the UN, was like one of the people who like massively argued to have that Security Council resolution. And you can sort of imagine being him being like, on the one hand, loads of money, maybe solve a problem. On the other hand, like, other problems not as yet satisfied because it hasn't happened yet and we haven't written about it yet.
You mentioned the League of Nations, and I just wondered whether sort of the result and the sort of disagreement between Congress and the President revealed that America has too many sort of inattentions to effectively govern a global empire in the same way as Britain did. I guess implicit in that question as well is whether or not you accept that America is a cultural empire.
Okay. I think, firstly, the differences between the League of Nations and the current setup with the United Nations, the IMF and the World Bank is important, because admittedly at that time the League of Nations did prove unsuccessful at maintaining this American ideal of a world peace because of course we had World War II. But I think the difference between the disputes between the President and Congress on the domestic level can't be extrapolated to an international level, because the President's role is foreign policy primarily held in his area, and also because when you look at the controlling interests, America didn't exactly have the same controlling interests of the League of Nations as it does today. With its share of the IMF funding, for example, it's the only one which reaches over 15% of the shares even to be able to veto policy, and the same with the World Bank. Also looking at the fact that the head of the World Bank and the head of the IMF have always either been an American citizen or a European citizen, it shows that you can propagate these values further on a governmental level. But I think more what I was looking for is that the cultural empire is more subversive and more underlying because of the American corporations holding that kind of power, because of the way people enjoy popular culture in the same way that they don't enjoy politics. They're maybe more likely to listen to popular figures, hence why you get singers, for example, becoming United Nations representatives. And I think in the same way that you get people in popular culture becoming part of policy as well. You see that in Britain on a domestic level, you see that on an international level with the way the United Nations attempts to fight problems and draw attention to it. So I would agree with you that America can't become an EU empire in the sense that Britain was an empire that can have controlling interests. But I think it's more an EU empire in the sense that it can set the agenda of the way the world moves. It can set the kind of trends that the world is going towards. Even though they've become independent of it, we are seeing the world moving towards a more capitalistic way. And we are seeing that American culture is being idolized in ways that you wouldn't have imagined back when the League of Nations was founded.
So I'm just wondering, why is it that you think that today money is a good in and of itself as opposed to a tool to access, I don't know, like information or, again, political influence or fame or something? I'm just wondering how you recognise the ultimate good so that, like, we'll know what the new one is when it's coming along. Like, how do you decide, why do you think that money is today's ultimate good and not something else?
Well, I think that mostly because I think about the recent financial crisis and the role that money played within this entire scenario. I mean, we'll always have social status, we'll always have political function, but nowadays we can say, for example, that social status can be nominated by looking at a person's, financial powers, okay? So in the future, as I said, money will not go away, okay? Neither will social status, neither will political function. It could be, the next dominant good could be something very abstract. It could be intention, for example. Or we might as well go back to some of the previous dominant goods. We could go back to social status and political function as well. But I think the dominant good is pretty much defined by the era we live in. So now in the capitalist era, pretty much the accent falls on money. You have profit, you have incentive to, make as much profit as possible. And I think that materializes in, again, the gain for money. Social status and political function, I think, now depend on this dominant good. And I think it's pretty much obvious if we look at the political scene as well, and at society structure.
You seem to be suggesting that America can continue to exist as a cultural superpower if it no longer exists as an economic and or military superpower. Is it not possible, though, that the status as cultural superpower is completely interlinked with its status as an economic superpower? So if you lose the economic superpower, you will necessarily lose the cultural superpower status.
I think that the idea of a cultural superpower has gone beyond the idea of what it is to be an American, what it is to be America. So if you look at the way we prioritize our capitalist system, before we had the option of communism, but now, if I came in and said, maybe we should be like the Soviet Union, maybe we should all have full employment and that kind of thing written into the Constitution, people would look at me as it being ludicrous because the idea is no longer has an alternative. So, yes, the companies themselves, Apple, Coca-Cola, and all these media companies are directly linked to America's status as an economic superpower. But I think the idea of what it is to be American, the idea of this God-given path suggested by Jefferson and the founding fathers, and then Wilsonian ideas of freedom of speech and independence and political determination, they've become so ingrained with the culture that America propagates through these companies that they're almost fused together and you can't really escape from that. So if one collapses, I don't think it will entail the collapse of the other unless there is a real alternative system that we can adapt to.